This is 91.3 FM WCW in Worcester, Massachusetts, the DrChris Radio of Horror program. And tonight on Radio of Horror, we have a composer on the show with us. It's very rare we get musical guests on, but we always try to when we can. And this musical guest has worked on such things as Leviathan, the story of Hellraiser Hellbound, You're So Cool, Brewster, the story of Fright Night, which was on Kickstarter last year and is coming out hopefully in June to everyone who kickstarted it. We have Lito Velasco coming on the show with us. Thank you for coming on the show with us, Lito.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
So currently, right now, before we get to the other film that you're working on, you've completed music for You're So Cool, Brewster, the story of Fright Night?
Yes, I wrapped that job up about, I want to say 6 weeks ago, maybe.
Cool. And how did you get started working in a lot of these like horror documentaries, like as far back as I think The Never Sleeps Again, the Elm Street Legacy was your first one, correct?
I did work on that one, yeah. I worked on that one, but I didn't do any music stuff. I came onto that show because I met one of the co-directors, Dan Farrens, who wrote Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. He and I met at a show. I want to say it was in Burbank or I don't know, Pasadena. Anyway, it was in the Los Angeles, Hollywood area, and we talked a lot and we hit it off. And he knew I was a big horror, geek, so he asked me to participate in some of these featurettes that they made for the special editions of the Friday the 13th films that they put on DVD years ago. I think it was 2008 or 2009. He asked me to come on and perform as an actor in some of these bonus features that they did, which I gladly did, of course. And then when they were doing the Nightmare on Elm Street documentary, he and I were talking about some other project. I don't remember what it was, but he said, oh, we're currently doing this Nightmare on Elm Street project. And I said, you're doing what? Because Nightmare on Elm Street is one of my favorite franchises of all time. And he said, yeah, I know you're a big fan. Would you like to come in and just kind of help out because we need an extra hand? And I showed up on set and I started doing some data transfer and, PA sort of gopher sort of stuff. And then my role just, continued to expand bit by bit because of my love for and knowledge of the series, and because Dan and Andrew, the co-directors, and Tommy, the producer, who I'd worked with on many projects, they were, kind enough to ask me to take an expanded role. And it really just sort of snowballed from there. I went from there to a feature film with Dan and Tommy, and then I went from there to a documentary about Scream called Scream, The Inside Story, which I was music supervisor and associate producer on. And then I worked with Tommy on a documentary about Return of the Living Dead. And just like I said, it just kind of took off from there. Tommy and I worked on the definitive Nightmare on Elm Street book together. He wrote it, and I was his editor. And, just I got my foot in the door in that way. And just because I'm a big horror guy, it just kept kind of going. So
I have that book.
Oh, then you have the Never Sleep Again book?
Yes.
Do you like it?
I do.
Good. I'm glad. I'm always glad to hear things like that. I'm glad you found it. It was a true labor of love on our part. Definitely Tommy, he busted his butt writing that thing, and I did everything I could to assist and support him as we went along, and it was a lot of research, and it was 3 years in the making, so we're always glad, Tommy's always very... Got it.
So I have a book called The New England Horror Filmmakers, and it's all about filmmakers that made their films here in New England. They had to be born here, and they had to make their movies here, kind of like being president of the United States. I know that's a big stretch, but that's the best way I can relate to that Nightmare on Elm Street book. So when that came out, that really kind of kickstarted my ass to want to get my own book finished. It is technically finished. The sample has been sent out to a few different publishers, but I keep getting, it sounds like a really great idea, but it's not for us.
Yeah, gotta love that. That's always fun.
So I don't quite know what to do. I've submitted to a couple of places that have really published books like that before. I'm not going to list name those publishers, just because I'm connected to a couple of them and I've asked a couple for favors recently. But they publish books like that, biographies about film-related subjects, most notably films in the horror industry. And I've gotten back, it's just not for us. I don't think it's a good idea. publish it yourself. I really don't like to publish myself. It's not easy.
It's a pain.
It's a pain. The book needs some editing, and I cannot afford the editor that would probably cost to edit that whole thing because it's over 100 pages now. Probably when it's completed, it will be over like about 125 pages maybe. But you said you edited the Nightmare on Elm Street book?
I did, so maybe we should talk.
There you go. I'll just hire you. I will pay you a hamburger today on Tuesday for a cheeseburger today.
There you go. Popeye financials. Very well done. Yeah.
Yes. Is that thank you. Yeah. Popeye just celebrated his 75th anniversary and nobody gave a shit. When I wake up in the morning, I need me coffee. It's like me spinach, and people look at me like, "What?" I'm like, "Oh, you people are so young."
I saw a guy wearing a Popeye shirt in the mall sometime at one point last year, and I walked past him. My wife and I walked past, and I pointed at his shirt, and I was like, "Oh, that's awesome!" And then we heard some little kid that walked by him behind us, and they went, "Mommy, who's on that shirt?" And I was like, "Oh God!" Like, made me kind of depressed.
So you're married?
I am married.
Do you have kids?
We do not have kids. No.
Keep it that way.
Yeah. Well, that's the plan. Don't worry.
So you've worked on every documentary that I own in my like most of the documentary. I own a ton of horror documentaries, and I own like every one that you worked on. So I've totally helped you like pay for your mortgage, which is awesome.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
But I seriously own like every documentary you work on, with the exception of a Return of the Living Dead, More Brains, just because I'm an okay fan, but I'm not that big of a fan of the film that I want to watch a documentary about it. The bonus material I've seen on my Blu-ray is perfectly fine with me. I'm not going to run out and get the Scream Factory release, which is coming out, just because, again, I'm like, that was a good movie, but I'm not as big of a fan as I am Scream, Friday the 13th, Hellraiser, and Nightmare on Elm Street. So it was just kind of surprising that you've worked on all those. And the only thing you haven't worked on is like a Halloween one. And honestly, I think Halloween really needs a better updated documentary because the last one we got was the 25th anniversary one. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of lackluster compared to these.
Well, I would just say, I don't know if I'd call it lackluster, but I'd definitely say it's just not, it could be so much more complete.
Oh, me being the critic and horror host will say this, and I know you probably can't, but definitely compare it to the Leviathan or Never Sleeps Again. It is definitely like, wow, that's only they crammed 10, like they crammed up until they crammed 8 films into an hour-and-a-half documentary because the 2 Rob Zombie films hadn't come out yet. But they have like 9 Nightmare on Elm Street, 8 Nightmare on Elm Street movies that's like 4 hours long, and you have 2 Hellraiser movies are like 8 hours long.
Right. Yeah. I got you. That's why, like I said, I hear where you're coming from. What happened? And I'd love to be involved.
Like really do an update on that because again, you can put in the 2 Rob Zombie movies. Plus, there's probably like more interviews that you could find because I'm watching that thing going, wow, there's a lot of people they did not interview. And then you got this stupid girl in the documentary who keeps taking her shirt off for some contest. And I'm like, this is not who made this.
Well, like I said, I definitely feel it's due for an upgrade, I would say, or a reboot.
Yes, like there's never going to be, like we know as much as we're ever going to know about Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th because of these documentaries, as well as like all the commentaries that have been on there on the different films.
Actually, there were still things that Tommy unearthed in his research for the Nightmare on Elm Street book that weren't featured in the documentary. So, I mean, I'd say we know a good 97 to 98% of what's going to be found out, but there were still these little, 2% gems that came out that I was like, where in the hell did you find that out? So.
And Tommy has been on the show twice. I don't know if he'll ever remember because he does so many interviews, but he's been on the show twice, once for Friday and once for Nightmare, and we've met him at Rock and Shock at least once.
Oh, cool.
So if you know him, just mention you'll be on the show and give him a hello and hi for us. Again, he does thousands of interviews, so I don't know if he'll remember, but it's been memorable to have him on the show both times, which was great. Usually they were hooked up through the studio, and then getting to meet him at Rock and Shock, which was a lot of fun.
Oh, he's a good friend, so I'll definitely tell him that you say hello and you send him your best regards.
And hugs and kisses too.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And then a little slash to the throat and a stab in the gut with a clawed hand too.
Got it.
Dr. Chris says hello.
I'll do that.
Which actually sounds more appropriate considering it's a horror movie, right?
Yes.
Instead of a hug and a kiss, you just like run him through with like a gloved, clawed hand.
Except I might make sure that the blades are made of rubber or plastic, but you know.
Or just hand him a little box and say, "Hey, Chris, I wanted to give this to you as a gift. Have fun," and you just run out of the room, close the door.
I'll be sure to put a name tag on it.
Hello, my name is BDSM. Now, doing the Leviathan, which is the one that I found out about you from Don't Fall Asleep, which is Paige Joy's fan film. But then I got really like, you did Leviathan! That was awesome! My God, I spent so many hours watching that thing because it's exhaustively. It is 11 hours to get through the entire thing. Were you a super big fan of Hellraiser beforehand? Did you have to rewatch all the movies? I mean, just working on the music, does it require you to get more involved with the other film, with the all the films, or what?
Kind of. There's a long answer to that. Essentially, it is Gary Smart, the guy who kind of the brainchild of the Hellraiser documentary. He co-wrote the definitive Return of the Living Dead book years and years ago, and then he hooked up with Tommy somehow, and they got the idea with Mike Perez to launch the More Brains video documentary, is I believe how the story goes. And since I worked on More Brains, I had actually co-written the main title music with Sean Hennessy. And so I had worked with Gary before on that show, and then I'd scored a bunch of the special features on More Brains, so that's how he kind of knew of me. And in 2014, when they were talking about, doing Leviathan, I think they were in the midst of the Kickstarter at that point, and he came to me and he asked, "I need a composer for this documentary. Do you know anyone?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I know a few people. Let me get some names." And I started shooting names out to him, and he kind of laughed and he said, "Duh, I was kind of suggesting in a funny way that you do it, but I guess the joke went over your head." And I was like, "Oh, really? Okay." And I guess he came to me because he knew my love for Hellraiser, he knew my love for horror, and he also knew that Christopher Young is a lifelong, I guess I'd say musical hero of mine. I really love his work. I know Chris, I've gotten to know him luckily through some events and through interviewing him for when we interviewed him for Never Sleep Again. He scored Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, so I got to chat with him, and then we chatted outside of the studio and we really hit it off. And so Gary knew my love for Hellraiser's score in particular, because I will go on record at any time saying I think the Hellraiser score is one of the best scores I've ever heard, and it's definitely one of my favorite scores of all time. Just because I love what Chris did that was so, in pace and step by step with what Clive's vision was, which was, people are so used to seeing horror as this ugly, horrifying thing, and it's something that you have to turn away from. And I thought the beauty of Clive's creation is just that. There was something seductively beautiful about that darkness that it kind of lured you in, and by the time you realized that you'd been lured in, it was too late. And I thought Chris's score, played upon that notion and that idea so wonderfully that, that music is, if you hear it without knowing what it is, you almost would have no idea when you're listening to certain tracks that it is a horror score, like the main title. I don't think anyone would ever guess, if they didn't know what it was, just listening to that blindly, that that's a horror theme. And of course there are themes or tracks on the score that are very horrific, but it's just so sublimely dark and beautiful. So Gary knew my love for that, so he, hinted at me scoring it, and me being the, self-effacing doofus that I can sometimes be, I didn't pick up on the hint, and so he just came right out and asked me, and I went straight to Chris the next day and said, "I've been approached to do this score, and I want to do a score that's a tribute to what you did. I don't want to, use your themes per se, but I want to write something that sounds like it almost came from your pen." And he was very gracious and gave me his blessing, and told me, he's like, if you want access to my piano charts or my scores, definitely let's meet, let's talk about it. And I went home that evening and actually wrote the theme that appears in the documentary, and told Gary and the entire crew, I said, I've already started writing. So it was kind of a perfect match for those reasons, and it was definitely a dream come true, because to work on anything Hellraiser related so that I could pay homage to a score and a composer that's meant so much to me was something that I'd been waiting for my entire life. And so to get to do that was pretty amazing. And I mean, I didn't really have to get too much deeper into the films than I had been before, because I know them so well. I've seen them so many times, and I love the material, both the cinematic and the musical material so much that all I had to do was really, listen to the score a few times with headphones to just put my brain there, and then I watched the first film once, and then I just took off from there.
Where did you go to school for all of this?
I went to Juilliard, and I also went to the Indiana University School of Music, and for high school I went to the Interlochen Arts Academy, which is the same school that Jewel went to. I don't know if you know the pop singer Jewel.
I was going to say the Juilliard schools where many famous actors have gone to, like Robin Williams, Christopher Reeve.
Yes, yeah, there have been a lot of great names coming
both have which passed away, but still, both always come to mind whenever I think of Juilliard. I was like, oh yeah, Robin Williams and Christopher Reeve were actually roommates at Juilliard.
Adam Driver, I think, also went to Juilliard, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Kylo Ren.
Yep. Kylo Ren.
Boo! Him and the Menendez brothers. Boo! Oh! There's a great meme I'm gonna find and I'll send to you. It's the Kylo Ren and the Menendez brothers at a family picnic. Is that too soon? I mean, they killed their parents back in 1990. All right, is it okay? By the way, you ever hear how the Menendez brothers are the reasons why Carlico Films went out of business?
No, I did not.
Yes, the Menendez brothers killed their parents, the mother and father. The father was the CEO of Carlico Films.
Oh, actually, I have heard this story. I can't remember where I heard it, but yes, I did hear this. And when I heard it, I remember my jaw just dropping. I was like, what the fuck? There's what? And I had to actually Google it.
Yeah, and I was just like, wait a minute. But I also heard like they were like sexually abused by their parents or something like that. I'm like, really? I mean, is this all true? And apparently it's like, no, that part is not true. Yeah, they were disciplined or something that they're not liking, and that's why they did it. Hey, you know where you can really find out about that? On the documentary you're on. Do you know how I found that fact out? From the documentary you're on. So I did a commentary for Fright Night Part 2 with a fellow filmmaker who had film critic, and she has never seen Fright Night Part 2 before. So I was like, this is perfect. So I'll be like the super nerdy, and you'll be like, kind of asking the questions about it. And I mentioned the line that the director of Halloween 3, he directed Fright Night Part 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's Tommy Lee Wallace, right?
Yes. And he mentions, he even says that he goes, the Menendez brothers not only killed their parents, they also killed Fright Night Part 2. Fuck you guys.
There it is.
And I was just like, no freaking way. And I started doing all this research on the internet, and I was just like, oh shit, when they killed their parents, that did kill a lot of the distribution, and it killed a ton of movies right afterwards. Yeah, I mean, the last movie Carlico made was Cutthroat Island. Oh,
Cutthroat Island.
Yes, which also killed the career of Gina Davis.
That's a Rennie Harlan flick, folks.
I mean, it was just like, wow, that is so true.
Interesting. Look at these little factoids.
Just little snippets and stuff like that. So, now, did you ever read the original? This is the last little thing about Hellraiser, because we got so much else to cover in so little time. Did you ever read The Hellbound Heart?
Yes, years and years ago. When I first saw Hellraiser, I, of course, ran out and got the book.
Okay, because Cinefix just posted a video for their compare and contrast between the book and the novel about Hellraiser and Hellbound, Hellraiser and Hellbound Heart, and I was just like, oh yeah, I completely forgot. Pinhead is supposed to be a woman.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's like this awful masturbation scene, and like the blood of his brother mixes with his semen and brings him back to life.
Oh, really? I'd forgotten about that part.
Yes, and you're just like thinking about it, going, "Wow, you really see why Clive
That's
Barker
not in
wants
my
to
brain.
remake it like the way it should have been." And it's like why at the time he probably couldn't put that type of material in there,
Oh, yeah.
but like today we probably could.
You probably could get away with that.
And it's just like so Pinhead is like doing terrible things to him, and he's jerking off on the floor while it's happening. You're just like, and she's like this hot chick in BDSM fetish wear, but with the pins in her head. So there's like that weird sexual attraction.
Clive Barker.
You know.
God bless him. Oh, no, no, not. We shouldn't say that. We shouldn't say that. But
Maybe. Well, Godspeed on his, of something. He's unfortunately in really bad health,
yes,
due
I'm not sure
to
if
HIV.
we should be saying that. But
Yeah. So hopefully something good will happen with him, and he can go back to doing something because he had to cancel his tour last year for the Scarlet Gospels.
I wish him all the best. I should say.
Yes. At least he's still with us. So
Yes,
yes.
thankfully.
Thankfully. And then, of course, the big thing I'm really waiting for, of course, is the You're So Cool, Brewster, the story of Fright Night. Is your music going to mirror the music from the actual films? Are you allowed to talk about it yet since it's not out yet? And since I'm also kind of like a stockholder of that film.
I could talk about it. I could talk about it a little bit. I'm not sure I'd say it's going to mirror exactly the music from the films, but it's definitely. I'm trying to evoke a certain type of feeling that's similar to what was written for the film. And then, of course, some of the pop songs that appeared in the film. I wouldn't say that I went as far as I did with what I did with Leviathan because I had Chris's blessing for that. So I would never try to harmonically, I would say, replicate something that someone else had done, even if I changed certain aspects of it without their blessing. And I never spoke to Brad about it one on one, so I didn't want to offend him or anything like that. But it's definitely going to evoke feelings of Fright Night, the first Fright Night, and of the '80s. It's very retro in its instrumentation and its sound.
Do we have like an actual release date yet? Do you know? Or.
Not mistaken, it is coming out in mid-June, I believe, but don't quote me on that.
Okay. All right.
I'm almost positive that's the release date.
That will be something I take the entire day off from work to watch.
Me too.
Like stock up on food and beer and just be like, all right, let's do this because this is my favorite vampire movie.
It's one of my favorites too.
And we have the lovely and my teenage heart crush, and before I even knew what a crush and a boner was when I was a child, Julie Carmen coming on the show.
Awesomeness.
Yes, I've been in love with her since Fright Night Part 2. Yeah.
I have an update on that release. It's June 27th.
June 27th. Okay. Hopefully we'll get the action figure at the same time and I can play with my Peter Vincent action figure
Love
with
it.
with my Dracula, Bela Lugosi action figure, just be like stab stab.
Set them up on the mantle with you as you watch the film and kind of act out the scenes as you go.
Yeah, totally, and just have someone walk in on it and I'd just be like I'd be like Rick Moranis in Spaceballs would like, "Don't ever walk into me while I'm playing with my toys."
Well, I'm actually not going to start scoring it for some time now. I guess I can't say anything as to the plot because of the whole secrecy
Yes, yes, of course.
environment surrounding it. But
We don't want you to get killed over revealing the Blue Harvest script.
right, exactly. I don't want to give away all the secrets. But I've only heard a few things about it from the people involved. Honestly, I haven't had a chance to learn too much about it at this point in time. And I know that if I'm not mistaken, the project's actually become larger than they initially thought it would be, because when I talked to them at first, I think they were saying something like the film was going to end up being something like 20 to maybe 25 minutes. And at last count, if I'm not mistaken, I think Paige and Deandra both said something about how the film is now closer to 40 or 45 minutes or just something lengthy like that. So it looks like they're actually, telling more of a story than I thought they were initially going to, which is, fine with all the Nightmare fans. I'm sure they'll love to see more about Nancy's story. Um, so it looks like it's going to be a bigger project than I initially thought, which is fine by me. I'm excited to work on it. I can't really say too much about the music except for the fact that I've been asked to compose a theme specifically for the character of Nancy Thompson, and I don't really think that's something that's been heard in the Elm Street series before. I know that in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, J. Peter Robinson wrote a couple of motifs that were associated with Heather, but I don't think he wrote anything that was specifically geared towards the character of Nancy, except for the recurring, theme that Charles Bernstein wrote. So it'll be interesting to write something specifically for that character, especially because she's so well known and iconic and loved, and she's a legend in the horror community and horror environment. So I hope I do her justice.
Now, when you work on, excuse me, when you work on multiple projects involving Nightmare on Elm Street, like you have, and another fan film, how do you make sure you're not doing the same music twice?
I mean, it just depends on what the film requires, what the film needs. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the story. Obviously, if you're scoring for a film, you want your score, you want your music to serve the story and to serve the characters and to serve the emotions of the film, or whatever's trying to be conveyed in that project. I think what'll keep it from being the same thing twice is simply that the last Elm Street project that I did, Nathan Thomas Milner's film, was very much about Krueger and his arrest, and him kind of toying with the police who thought they had him over the barrel, and that was very much more about being creepy and channeling the essence of fear, and tapping into the more eerie aspects of the sound that Charles Bernstein had created for the first film. I think with this film, we're going to be having nightmarish aspects, of course, but this story is really focused on Nancy. And I think what'll keep it from being the same thing over again is, even though I'll have a similar sound in that they want this to sort of sound like it came from the mind of Charles Bernstein, while also having my own flavor in it. I think that the fact that it's focused on Nancy, the theme will be Nancy's theme. It's not going to be a Freddy theme. So I think that'll keep it from simply being the same thing over and over again. And, aside from that, I'm not really sure how different it's going to be because, like I said, I haven't seen the footage yet. So, I mean, I could be entirely wrong. Maybe I'll see the film and I'll say, you know what, this has a lot of horror aspects. Maybe it needs to sound more like, the original Nightmare than I thought it would. But I think that's a long answer for what you're asking.
With a movie that's like 25 minutes long, not the entire or longer, as you said, it might be longer. How much music do you end up composing for it? Does it end up being longer than the film itself, and then you have a bunch of unreleased tracks? And how much music's actually played through a movie? You got to think about that. You listen to Star Wars, and like every scene has music. And I use Star Wars as an example just because it's composed by the great John Williams,
Yeah.
or Jaws if you want to go into horror movies. But you get what I'm saying. Not every scene has music, but it seems like most of the most pivotal scenes in film do.
Yeah, it really depends on the film itself. I think it's interesting that you asked that question because when I scored The Confession of Fred Krueger for Nathan Milner, when we started spotting the film, there's a process called spotting where the director watches the film and literally spots which moments he wants to have music and, writes down his thoughts and then conveys them to the composer after the composer has spotted the film on his own. At least, I think that's the way it should be done. I think the director should come at it with their own approach, and then the composer should come at it with their own approach, and then they can compare and contrast notes. With that film, we both went into it thinking, well, there's not going to be a ton of music, because when you think about the first Nightmare on Elm Street, it has, a decent amount of score, but there's not a ton of score. So we were really approaching it from that mindset, and the more we started working on spotting the film, the more I started spotting it, the more I realized, actually, you know what? This film would benefit from having a longer score than we initially thought it would. And there's very few minutes in Confession of Fred Krueger that are not scored, which is not typical for a horror film, I think I'd say. For something like Don't Fall Asleep, I think it's very much going to just be determined by what's happening on screen. There's no way for me to really predict that. I think the more visual the film is, the less dialogue there is. I think the more that the music is needed to support what's happening on film. That's just my personal take. I think it's interesting that you brought up Star Wars, because Star Wars is a very visual series, and George Lucas, when he first, got into those films, he said he always kind of pictured them as silent films almost, because everything's being told through the visuals. There is dialogue, but the dialogue, like he himself would admit, that dialogue is not my strong suit, so I don't really rely on that. I rely on the visuals and the music to do a lot of the work. It's like if you look at the end of every Star Wars film, it is a type of silent film because there's not a lot being said. All of those films end with 2 to 3 minutes of visuals just with music accompanying them. There's no dialogue. So in that regard, the music is very much necessary. In a film like Jaws, the music is very much necessary because there was no working shark. So Spielberg needed Williams to fill in for where the shark wasn't working, because all there were point of view shots. So like I said, it just really depends on what the film needs. I have never written tracks that haven't made it into the film. There are alternate tracks, but those are just versions of the final track before they're final. I've never scored a film and had tracks that weren't released, that weren't used, just because I tend to just score to the picture and not overcompose, because then it's just sort of, it's not the most efficient use of my time.
You didn't do the music for Never Sleeps Again, the documentary.
No, I did not.
Okay.
That was Sean Hennessy, who I worked with him on More Brains and Scream Inside Story.
But you also did the music for Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, the Mark
Patton.
Yeah, Mark Patton. I almost said Mark Pillow, and that's the guy who plays Nuclear Man in Superman 4. Whoa. Excuse the hell out of me. Yeah. I think when we had Mark on the show and in the studio too, and we actually mentioned Mark Pillow, and he's like, someone's gonna find that guy, because like me, everyone thought he was dead.
Oh my God. People want to talk to Nuclear Man after all these years.
I don't think he wants to talk to anybody. That was the one and done deal he did.
Yeah, poor guy. And he probably thought it was going to be a huge hit too. But
I think it would have been better if you had actually played Bizarro and not Nuclear Man. Because then otherwise your Destroy Superman would have been a lot more like, yeah, Bizarro, kick Superman's butt.
It would have had a little more gravitas.
Yeah, and he wouldn't have had that manicure he had. I mean...
So on the subject of Mark Patton, God, no, I can't stop picturing that guy's hair. So with Scream Queen, I've been hired to do that documentary. I haven't actually started scoring yet. If I'm not mistaken, I think they're still deep in editing. So once I see it cut, I'll start scoring that. How do I make, you asked, the music for Don't Fall Asleep different from Confession? Basically, I mean, we're going for the same kind of instrumentation and aura in terms of getting back to that 80s Charles Bernstein kind of orchestration and the types of synthesizers and pianos that he used, and some of the voice effects, because I'm not sure if you knew, but Charles added a lot of voice effects to the original Nightmare on Elm Street score, which were actually himself doing a cappella singing and voices and whispering, and then he would run it through processors, and that's what we heard in the final score. But I did some of that on Confession, so I'll definitely be doing some of the same things, but the way that we're going to make it different is, like I mentioned earlier, since Confession was about Fred, it had to be darker. It had to be a little more off balance and a little more creepy and unstable, and I used a lot of mixed meters on that score, and I wouldn't necessarily be doing that for this film, except for, nightmare sequences specifically, as they appear, if they appear in this film. There'll be some softer instrumentation the theme is not going to be obviously as dark. It's going to definitely evoke feelings of A Nightmare on Elm Street because I want to base it in the same harmonic voices of Charles Bernstein's theme, but the theme is not going to be as unsettling because something that Charles did for the Nightmare on Elm Street theme was he used a lot of neighboring tones, which I don't know if the listeners know what that is, but that's, for those that don't know what a neighbor tone is, it's a note that is a half step away from another note, and it can actually be a half step or a whole step, but the half step neighbor tones are ones that are often not found in the key that you're writing in, so they don't quote unquote belong in that key. So when they appear, they have this kind of unsettling kind of way of affecting the listener that's almost subconscious, because we've been brought up to perceive music in a way that the Western world hears music a certain way because of, the history of our music. So when you hear these tones, it kind of makes you go, huh? Even though you're not aware of it. And I did a lot of that in my score for Confession, and obviously I wouldn't be doing so much of that on this score. I would be trying to make it as, powerful but beautiful, because she's a beautiful character inside and out, and she's extremely powerful, but at the same time there's something very tragic to the character of Nancy Thompson, because no matter how hard she tried, she could never quite escape her destiny, which was, to die in the nightmare. And unfortunately, no matter how many other souls she saved, she lost her own in the process. I mean, I wouldn't say she lost her own, but her soul, but she lost her life. So to me, there's something haunting and tragic that has to be conveyed in the music as well, as opposed to, Fred's music, which is just creepy and disturbing.
And what do you use for instruments? And do you work with more? I'm assuming it's not just you.
No, it is actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is just me. What I do is I have a synthesizer that is, it's a full-size 88-key synthesizer with weighted keys, so it feels like a piano. And it's the same size as an actual piano in terms of the keys and the keyboard. And that's connected to my handy-dandy iMac computer, and I use a program called Logic. And essentially, the instruments that I get are all from a library of sounds that I have. I have, thousands and thousands of sounds. And obviously for Leviathan, I had to make sure I had strings that sounded like a true orchestra, because if you are going to do justice to Chris's Hellraiser score, you absolutely have to have, strings that sound real. So I spent some good money on some good string programs, and, you shape the MIDI lines in the computer to make them sound more real. And it's a lot of hard work. Like, writing for Leviathan, I was writing for like a 60-piece orchestra, and I'm the person that's recording every single instrument. I'm playing it at the piano, and then I'm shaping it in the computer, and then I'm equalizing it and, mastering it and then releasing it. So for something like the Nightmare scores for Confession and for Don't Fall Asleep, because it's rooted in retro 80s, much like Fright Night score was, you're toning down the number of instruments. You're not writing for a 60-piece orchestra with strings and brass and timpani and that sort of thing. You're writing for pianos and synths and synthesized strings and voice beds and things like that. So you might have, 25 instruments as opposed to 65. So it's still done the same way, though. I have to play each line, and then I have to shape it, and I have to make sure everything blends, and then I have to master it and release it. So yeah, it's just me. I'm a one-man band, as they say, but it also gives me a lot of, I have complete control over what I'm doing, which is very nice, because the directors that I've worked with have all been very kind in that they've given me their trust, and they had confidence when they hired me, which was very flattering. And I just give them what they ask for and what the film needs specifically, because sometimes you look at the film and you have to have a discussion about, they see it one way and you might not necessarily see it that way, and you try to explain to them why you think it needs something different, or maybe you have to give them what they want. The most important thing is obviously serving the film. You have to serve the needs of the story and the needs of the characters, and you have to do it on your own. And that's, it's fun. It's like I said, time consuming and exhausting sometimes, but this is what I went to school for, and this is part of what I trained for aside from acting. So I'm glad to do it. I'm happy to do it.
Let me ask you this. Two last questions. One really small, which is yes or no, and then the bigger one. Are you unionized? And would you, if you found out that they are casting and recruiting for the cast and including music for the next attempt to try and do Nightmare on Elm Street again, would you send your application in with your filmography saying, "This is what I've done. I want to score this movie"?
As a composer, I'm not unionized. As a performing musician, I am unionized, and as a actor, I am unionized. I belong to SAG-AFTRA.
Would that allow you to compose for a Nightmare on Elm Street? Of course, the only other thing about that is that you would actually have to compose with an orchestra, and you're used to doing everything yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I would. Yes, it would allow me to do both if they decided to do that. I would absolutely love to try to do that, and I would absolutely do whatever needed to be done. I actually, when I found out that they were making another Hellraiser film, I've been working on getting my CD score from Leviathan to the director of that film, because one of the critics, Randall Larson, who some people know that name, he wrote a very kind review of my score to Leviathan, and he said, if there's another Hellraiser film being made, this guy needs to score it. So I've been trying to get that CD to the people that are in charge of that decision, and of course I would try to, get on the next Nightmare on Elm Street film. It would obviously depend on what they're trying to do. I don't know if so many film series now seem to want to go back to the beginning, like Texas Chainsaw, that the last sequel tried to go back and kind of reboot the timeline from after the first film, and I heard that they were trying to do that with Halloween, and I've heard talk that there might be doing a Friday the 13th sequel that takes place between part 2 and part 3, or part 3 and part 4. I can't remember which one. But all these series seem to be going back because retro is so in right now that they seem to think that that's the direction to go. And so obviously if they went in that direction, I would say yes, I want to do it, and I have the resume in terms of sound. The only thing would be, I don't think many studios are so willing to take a chance on an unproven quote-unquote composer, no matter what their education pedigree or their filmography resume may say. So that would be the uphill battle, would just be convincing them that, look, I know I haven't scored any huge feature films, but that doesn't mean that I can't do this job.
Or you could be the assistant to whoever's doing it, and that would obviously give you a little bit more
yes, exactly,
credibility within the main Hollywood. I don't want to say like the mainstream Hollywood engine, but I mean that's basically what the new Nightmare on Elm Street remake or reboot, whatever the frick it's going to be called, is going to be compared to what you are, which is independent filmmaking. All the projects you've worked on have all been independently financed,
right.
Hence on Kickstarter.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to see where they go, because I mean, I read, I was lucky to get my hands on a copy of the Halloween Returns script by Dunstan and Melton, I believe it was, and it was interesting because they were definitely doing that retro continuity thing. And I've said for years that I know Robert Englund, who I absolutely adore, and I've been lucky enough to work with on a few projects. I know that he said that, I don't have another one in me, but there's ways to do another
video games. Oh.
Yeah, heck, I mean, just use Robert in the close-ups and the
motion caption suit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million ways that they could get.
You don't need to have Robert actually being hoisted up with cables onto a thing. You could just have him jumping up and down in the same place. And just that be like, okay, now we're going to animate Robert up on the ceiling because he's animated. I mean, look at Kane Hodder. Of course, granted, Kane Hodder did get injured making the Friday the 13th video game. But he's a stuntman, too, so he knows what comes with it. Robert's not a stuntman, but you don't need him to do stunts for this movie, considering the fact that he's not a physical actor. He is a... compared to Jason, Freddy does not get his hands nearly as dirty as Jason did.
Right. Robert was put through the mill on, I think, the most on Jason. And I know he talked about how it took a lot out of him. And Robert always brings a great physicality to every role, but the physicality that he's doing is is a completely different kind of physicality as opposed to, something that Kane was doing or something that someone like Chris Duran did on Halloween H2O. I mean, Robert, like I said, you put some mocap dots on his face to get the performance, and I think the possibilities are limitless. It's just a matter of whether they want to go that route or not.
Yeah, and I mean, you could if you really want some in-depth information about the Friday the 13th video game, go on to Radio of Horror's videos, the Radio of Horror's Facebook page under the videos, and you'll find a link to the exception of like a minute missing due to the feed cutting out, the entire panel from PAX East talking about the video game with Q&As and so on and so forth. And they even mention, someone asks about Freddy versus Jason, but he's like, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th was a little easier because Sean Cunningham owns the license to Friday the 13th. So we were allowed access to those films. And when he says those films, they were most likely referring to the Paramount original 8.
Right.
9, 10, 11, and 12 are all made by New Line Cinema, owned by Warner Brothers. Now, I think Paramount owns all the films again because of a distribution deal with Interstellar. Yes. It had something to do with Warner Brothers wanted Interstellar's international distribution rights, and Paramount was like, that's fine, give us back Friday the 13th, including everything that you did.
Right.
So they own all the films now. However, the logos for those movies are still under the New Line Warner Brothers logo, so that it's a lot of legal crap I really don't feel like finishing talking about on the show, but you get what I'm saying.
The habeas and corpus, and yes.
Exactly. So, but with Nightmare on Elm Street, those are all owned by Warner Brothers.
Right.
Under New Line. That's a bigger issue. I mean, look how long it took them to get a good Batman game made. You ain't going to get a good Nightmare on Elm Street game made at least for a little while. Not until, let's just say this. Let's just see what the reaction to this Friday the 13th game is. Obviously, they can look on Kickstarter and they can look on Backkick and see the numbers about how well it's been financed. But that doesn't mean anything if the game comes out and it is atrocious. Because fans will have the heads of everyone that they just wasted money on Kickstarter for. I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but I have not played the game.
I think it doesn't happen either because I was one of the backers and I took one of the big packets.
Oh, you did? Yeah, see, I did the digital, but then later on I upgraded to a physical copy.
Yeah, I think I did the physical copy, but I can't remember which one I got, but I think it was $100 or something like that.
Oh, you went a little crazier, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted, I was like, hey, because I've been saying for years, I'm such a fan that I'm like, how do they not have good Friday the 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream video games? Because again...
Well, there was a Chucky game in development. I don't know what happened to that. I really, every time I think about it, it's not at a time I'm at a computer or at a time that I'm not busy that I go, okay, let me just research what happened to the Child's Play game.
Well, like I said, and there's another property that, again, I know part of it might be that they don't want, kids playing, video games where they're serial killers, but fuck, Grand Theft Auto, kids are playing that, and I'm sorry, but some of the things that happen in there, in my opinion, are no worse than them taking the mantle of Jason Voorhees in a video game.
No kidding. You run someone over with a car or beat up a hooker and money flies out of them or kill a cop.
Right.
That's any different than splitting a woman from crotch to mouth. Which is, by the way, I'm not joking, that is a kill in the game. Oh, Kane rips a woman in half from crotch to mouth.
Well, there you have it, folks.
Takes a woman and bashes her head in with the door, and he does his favorite kill, the sleeping bag kill. And he does it the 7 count that he's allowed to.
Nice. I saw the head in the door one when they released some game footage, and I was like, okay, this game's gonna rock.
I don't know if they're gonna get an ESBRB rating, if they have to, even if they're an independent video game. I'm not sure how independent video games work with that.
Yeah, that's a good question. That'll be interesting to find out because, you would think it wouldn't matter so much unless they're trying to get mainstream.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like they're gonna stick this in GameStop or Walmart.
No. Well, it'll turn up in the used bins in GameStop probably, but...
Oh my... Who the hell would do that if you kickstarted this thing,
Well, hey, there are people that don't think about things like that, man. They're not thinking. They're just thinking about getting credit for the next, Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, where can people find out more information about you and your music and what you've worked on? And you have some CDs for sale too.
I do, and people can find out more about me. Just go to facebook.com and, put facebook.com/Hollywood Lito, or just search Hollywood Lito on Google, and that will turn up my Instagram, my Twitter, my Facebook, everything. Like I said, I'm not just a musician, I'm also an actor. I have two films coming out this year, one of which is a retro slasher holiday film titled All Through the House, and I play the villain. I play the killer in that film, and it's got some awesome throwback kills. It's got some awesome retro slasher vibes. I think people are really going to enjoy it because it's not just a retro slasher that, there seem to be a lot of those, but this is a really smart, clever, and very, very funny retro slasher that clearly has its heart on its sleeve. It really, Todd, the director, writer-director, he and I have been friends for almost a decade now. He and I are both, children of the 80s, and we both are very in love with the genre. So when he made this film, I knew it was going to be something special because I knew where he was coming from. And I think people who are horror fans are really going to enjoy it because people seem to love holiday themed slasher films, and this one is, like I said, it's very fun, and it's got the kind of kills people want to see. There's no CGI blood, it's all practical effects.
Great, awesome. I got tripped up on my words. Hold on a second. Well, we appreciate you taking some time out to come on the show to talk all about your filmography. The one thing we didn't get to, just because we're running out of time, is Scream the Inside Story. You were the music supervisor on that too. It's too bad that didn't really have like a kind of a separate release. The only way you can buy it is in the original trilogy package.
Yep, in the box set.
Yeah.
It's a good buy because it's like, I think it's $10 right now on Amazon.
Oh my God, are you kidding me? I spent $20 on that thing. I feel ripped off.
That always happens when we don't wait for something.
But it was kind of weird because that Blu-ray set had no bonus material for the individual films, and it's just that documentary.
Yeah, well, it's that, and it's the other documentaries, Scream. I can't remember what it was called, but there's Still Screaming. There's another.
Yeah. Okay. So you're on Scream the Inside Story. Okay. Yeah, that's right. There's Still Screaming, right, which is the one made by the guys who made Nightmare on Elm Street.
No, that I think that one was made by the guys that did. His name was Jason, I believe.
Oh, okay, that one. Okay, wait, wasn't Tommy also involved in His Name Was Jason?
He was. I think.
I remember him talking about it at Rock and Shock. He's like, I don't like to talk about it because obviously His Name Was Jason was a studio cash grab because the remake was coming out and it's a butchered documentary compared to the 4-hour version that we got, the Crystal Lake Chronicles.
Like Memories, yeah.
Memories, yeah.
Yeah, Tommy was a writer on His Name Was Jason, I believe.
Yeah, I feel like he doesn't like that one that much.
I get that vibe as well.
Yeah. Maybe he wasn't legally allowed to come out and say it like that, you know what I mean?
No, I don't even know if I'd say that.
I've learned over 9 years people can't legally say things to me about things they worked on, but it's just like, how about this? I'm going to say it for you.
And I don't think I would even say it's that he didn't like it. I think he just felt like I do about the Halloween documentary. I just feel like he felt there was so much more material that could be mined that it's engulfed by this great shadow that was cast by Crystal Lake Memories, and so that people, saw that one and they were like, well, there's no need to go back and watch the other one. So
true, definitely. But I have them all. I have I had the Crystal Lake Chronicles book, and I actually gave it to somebody, or I think I sold it. But when I sold it, the money went to charity because I got the ebook with the extra stuff in it. Yeah, so I got the ebook with the extra new stuff in it. So
it's pretty awesome, isn't it?
Yeah, but I remember I did buy the original. So when I was at a bookstore, I was at Newbury Comics, I was like, oh my God, $40, here you go, give that to me. And then when the digital version came out, I paid for that too. So I'm all about making sure it's going, the money is being paid for and it's not being bootlegged, or I'm getting like a free copy unless it's being gifted to me to do, doing the show or something.
You are supporting independent creations, which is awesome.
I try to do my best to do that. Again, if they offer me a review copy, then I gladly take it, obviously, but I will always at least try to buy a version.
And we thank you for that.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, hey, Lito, thank you so much for coming on the show with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me very much. I really appreciate that very, very, very much. It's always nice. It's always a pleasure to talk about, art, and it's always a pleasure to be thought of as someone that's worth talking to. So thank you.
Thank you.